I'll explain every galaxy in Star Wars other than that main one on today's video. Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So I've said this many times, but in Star Wars and really in any universe, I always love the edge of the map, the unexplored areas, and what's beyond. Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, I was always wondering what's going on in those other continents, and often the mystery is more intriguing than anything an author could actually come up with. Star Wars begins on Tatooine in the Outer Rim, but what's beyond that? Well, we'll talk about that today. Ahsoka Season 1, of course, brought the idea of extragalactic travel to the forefront, as did the Yuuzhan Vong War in Star Wars Legends. In Ahsoka, not only do we have another galaxy and other planets, but even distant, far-off mountain ranges in these faraway places, so the sense of exploration and wonder is certainly there. Today we'll talk every other galaxy in Star Wars other than the main galaxy, or at least the ones which have some importance, because of course there were uncountable galaxies in the universe, and according to the opening crawl, Star Wars takes place a long time ago in a galaxy far away, so presumably the Milky Way does exist somewhere, so that's number one. Number two would be the galaxy in which Peridea resides. They travel there, of course, in Ahsoka Season 1. It's one of my favorite plot threads a Star Wars TV show has done, and it's shown to be an incredibly energy-intensive and difficult journey, which I really appreciated. You know, there's the idea that hyperspace lanes are somewhat naturally occurring. You follow the shadows in hyperspace after they've been plotted by intrepid explorers, but traveling outside the galaxy presumably is a bit more difficult. And before we get into more specific locations, this is also where I will jump to Star Wars Legends and mention the plans of one Emperor Palpatine. I was going to say Sheev Palpatine, but his first name was not Sheev in Legends. Palpatine, as described in the Dark Empire sourcebook, had plans to conquer other galaxies and eventually rule the entire universe. That's why he created things like the World Devastators and the Sovereign-class Super Star Destroyers. They were meant to be his intergalactic fleet, and he's not the only Dark Lord of the Sith which has had such aspirations. However, if we want to stick a little closer to home, there are some more mundane things which happened outside the galaxy, and if we flip to page 34 in the Essential Atlas, we get a section on globular clusters and satellite galaxies. So, for one, although not proper galaxies, there are small collections of stars which are on the edge or perhaps even in intergalactic space because of their distance from the galactic plane, either above or below. They were very old stars and typically devoid of life. One mentioned specifically in the section is Cosm's Well. However, more noteworthy, the Star Wars galaxy, and I found this so interesting when I first learned it, was orbited by dwarf satellite galaxies, 7 in particular, named by distance, with the closest Companion Auric and the furthest Companion Grek. Auric and Besh are actually fairly close to the Star Wars galaxy, with Beck being 150,000 light years away, and I'll talk about them more in a second. Kresh apparently has only been visited by automated droids as far as the storyteller in the Essential Atlas is aware, and then the other companion galaxies are far further out. As with most parts of extragalactic space, these are technically parts of the unknown region, but the galaxies do have some stories of their own. For example, the closest galaxy was the Rishi Maze, which is referenced directly in Episode 2. You can actually see it very briefly on screen when Obi-Wan is looking for Kamino in the Jedi Library. We really don't hear a whole lot about the Rishi Maze. However, there is a really fun story I've covered on the channel before called Maze Run from Star Wars Insider, where Han and Chewie visit the galaxy and come across a derelict Sith destroyer. Very cool. Companion Besh, however, is, in my opinion, far more interesting. This is known by its inhabitants as Fire Fist, and I hold this one close to my heart. So I've talked about this story before, but in the 1970s and 80s, Marvel had a line of Star Wars comics. They mostly, or at least largely, covered content from the movies, but they told stories both between the movies and after. However, there were very strict rules on what they could include in content set after Episode 6. They couldn't really feature the Empire, So, a new threat was created in the form of the Nagai and the Toph, two belligerents from Fire Fist who would take their war to the Star Wars galaxy. Eventually, the Rebels, or really the Alliance of Free Planets at that time, would partner with the Nagai to fight off the Toph. The Mandalorians would chase them back to their home galaxy, and Lumaya is also featured in these. She'd come back later for Fate of the Jedi. Very, very fun little bit of continuity, which, yeah, casually throws in another galaxy, as comics of that time were often to do. There was, however, another big conflict featuring belligerents from another galaxy, the Yuuzhan Vong. We never learned a whole lot about the Yuuzhan Vong and their history, their galaxy. What we do know is that two robotic species, later retconned to be the Abominor and the Silentium, waged a massive war in the galaxy where the Yuuzhan Vong and other sentient species suffered. The Yuuzhan Vong fought back and actually became the dominant species in the galaxy, later, however, destroying all life in what was known as the Kremlevian War, after which point they're forced to leave and look for a new home in their massive world ships. I believe in the New Jedi Order there's a reference to them coming across several dead galaxies, but it's not until they find the Star Wars galaxy that they're ready to settle down and start their invasion. They are eventually beaten back, but not, of course, after much devastation. The Yuuzhan Vong, I feel mixed about them because they're supposed to be even more alien in a galaxy with already many alien things, but they end up being essentially edgy humans, and that's something the New Jedi Order as a novel series begins to play with. For example, the Yuuzhan Vong have almost identical genetics to humanity. There's hinted to be some relation between the two, but unless you want to look beyond official works, there's not really a good explanation. We almost learn more of the space beyond the Star Wars galaxy through the Outbound flight. Travel outside the Star Wars galaxy was made different by hyperspace disturbances, as I've covered many times in prior videos. I'd be happy to broach the topic again if you're interested, but the Outbound flight was meant to use the power of several Jedi Masters and their apprentices to pierce the barrier and to see what was beyond. There was also the Exgral Society, as we see in really just book 1 of the New Jedi Order, Vector Prime, who, not unlike SETI, are looking for signals beyond the galaxy for proof of life outside. Those are the main other galaxies mentioned. There are some smaller details. For example, and I remember this discussion coming up, the Qua, who were native to Dathomir, were believed to be from another galaxy. I say that was brought up because of the Dathomir extragalactic connection in Ahsoka Season 1. Then also in that original Star Wars Marvel run I mentioned earlier, comic issue 38, a very wacky and fun issue, the Star Heroes are brought through a hyperdrive malfunction to intergalactic space, what the comic says is beyond the galaxy, lost somewhere in the intergalactic void. Out there, they encounter a vessel, which is, well, suitably alien, and on the vessel, they encounter a pilot who talks of a war in his home galaxy. I've covered this comic in depth. There are some real interesting similarities to this being in the Yuuzhan Vong. But yeah, those are the other galaxies in Star Wars. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. That's all I've got for you today. If there's something you'd like me to explore deeper, please let me know. But keep in mind, much of what I've covered in this video, I've also broken down in more detail just in their own content. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time.